January 27th, 2020 at 6:30 p.m. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. Next up is disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Seeing none for tonight. Public meetings. This is an informal public meeting to consider Official Plan Amendment Number 29, City of Waterloo, Herbsville South Block Plan. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a future meeting. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive formal notice of the formal public meeting. Anybody who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. The planner, Rick Martins, will now provide a brief overview of the application. Welcome, Rick.
Good evening, Mayor, members of Council, members of the public. Tonight I want to provide an overview of the Herbsville South block plan. We've been developing this over the last 12 months. There's a bit of a process before that, so I will provide just a brief overview and then hand it over to Bobby Gauthier from WSP Consulting, who will provide an overview of the details of the contents of the plan. So just to bring you a reminder of where we've gotten to, how we've gotten here tonight. Back in June 2018, Council approved the Herbsville South environmental study, which was a comprehensive study looking at the natural features, wetlands, and forest areas of the subject lands. It identified the development limits for the plan and set the groundwork and framework for the block plan process to begin. At the same council meeting, council approved the terms of reference for an updated terms of reference for the block plan study, which is a land use study to identify appropriate land use for the area. It provides a bit more detail than the official plan to allow for future development of the subject lands. Once that updated terms of reference was approved, the city retained WSP Consulting to undertake the block plan study in accordance with the provisions in the terms of reference. I just want to note that the reason it was an updated plan is originally the terms of reference was approved in 2012, but given the timing of the environmental study, we provided an update to be a bit more current and to address some of the policy changes that have happened provincially and that affects the planning in the city. So with that, that is a process there, sorry. So as far as the process for the block plan, we began early in 2019 with the public process. We had a public meeting in winter of last year to provide an overview of the process overall. We came back in the spring with draft options for land use that we brought forward to the community. Based on the feedback that we received from those meetings and from other consultation with the public, we developed a draft plan that was released publicly in November of 2019, and that is the plan that we will be presenting here tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Bobby, and he'll provide a bit more detail on the actual plan.
Okay, thank you, Rick, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and members of the public for joining us this evening. So I have just a bit, got some technical difficulties here. It's not the correct presentation. If I may just, can I control? Oh, there it is. Perfect. Thank you very much. So as Rick mentioned, my name is Bobby Goche. I'm with WSP, and we are the consulting firm that the city retained to assist in completing the study. I'll keep the presentation pretty brief. It's just about 10 minutes, and I want to start out with a brief refresher on the purpose of the study for people that are new in attendance and haven't been up to speed yet. Talk about the timeline and the process. Rick's gone over a little bit of that, but I'll offer a few highlights and comments on that. And then I'll spend the bulk of my time talking about the proposed block plan. That's why we're here today, is to hear about that. And then I'll close off with some next steps in the process. So the purpose of the study, I think the first point I wanted to make is what we're doing here is actually implementing one of the policies of the City of Waterloo's official plan. The policy states that before development can take place within the Urbsville South block plan area, a block plan is required to be completed. So before the city can accept development applications, we have to get through this study process. The study addresses nearly 30 hectares of land in the vicinity of the northwest corner of the city of Waterloo. I'll get to the study map just on the next slide. And really what the study is about is creating a plan, establishing policies, guidelines, and expectations around development. So the study is going to set expectations for protecting the environment, protecting environmental and natural areas. In particular, I think it's important to point out that we are carrying forward and implementing the recommendations of the Urbsville South environmental study. Members of council may remember that coming forward in June of 2018 for endorsement. So we're building on that study. The other key purpose of this block plan is to set out guidance for development applications. What kinds of land uses are appropriate in the study area? What kinds of unit types are we talking about? Singles, semis, detached, townhouses, and so on. So we want to drill down on what appropriate land uses should be developed here. So that's what the study is all about. It's setting expectations for development. So here's the study area in the vicinity of Urbsville Road. It's kind of hard to describe the shape of the study area, some sort of irregular horseshoe or something like that. But effectively, if you take a look at it, you can see it encompasses a range of different uses, principally lands that are farmed, as well as environmentally sensitive lands. There's also a few existing houses. The Regal Place subdivision is excluded from the study area, of course, because Regal Place is already developed, so we don't need to set development expectations for Regal Place. We're focusing on the lands where there is potential development opportunity. So the timeline and the process, just go over this pretty quickly. The study's been going on for about a year now, a bit over a year. It was initiated following the completion of that very detailed environmental study process. One of the first things we did in the study back in February of last year was we conducted our first public open house. So one of the first things we did, we got out to the community, we introduced the study, we kicked it off, and we sought the public's input on issues and opportunities to be addressed. Based on the input we received, we completed a very detailed draft discussion paper and land use analysis report. It's a very lengthy report. It addresses different options for development. It characterizes the background work, including the environmental study, and it proposes a path forward. It also included a pretty in-depth traffic impact study. In June of 2019, we had our second public open house, and we presented the results of that analysis to the community. On the basis of all of the input we received, the directions from that report, we moved on to draft the block plan. And that's why we're here tonight, to present that draft block plan for formal public input. And as Mayor Jaworski noted, of course, this is just presenting the document as an introduction for input. And we're still open to making revisions and finalizing the plan. So after tonight, the intent is to finalize the plan based on the comments received. There will be another public meeting towards the spring, and we'll be looking for council adoption within about 3 to 4 months. So it's a bit tricky to characterize the block plan and summarize it concisely, because it is, of course, a pretty detailed land use policy document with a wide range of different policies. So I think what I'll do is I'll focus a little bit on summarizing, I guess, the intent of the plan, what the plan is trying to achieve with all of its policies. The first thing you'll find in the plan is a vision and guiding principles surrounding protecting the environment. That's a very clear objective of this plan. There's a wide range of policies to support that. We also want to ensure that future development is going to be compatible with existing adjacent low-density residential uses. What that means is mitigating impacts, ensuring that there are no impacts on existing uses. We want to create a complete, attractive, and walkable community. And we want a wide range of unit types and frequent and convenient pedestrian access for residents. We want to ensure the efficient use of land as well as an efficient road network, consolidating access, creating pedestrian linkages, and so on. And that kind of speaks to the next point as well. We also want to conserve cultural heritage resources. So there are policies in place to ensure that development is sensitive to the idea that a portion of the study area is within a cultural heritage landscape. Another key aspect of the plan, and I'll show it on the next slide, is the land use plan, the land use designations. So there are some policies to support that map, which is Schedule B, and the policies indicate what kinds of uses are permitted, as well as what kind of criteria the city is looking for when it receives a development application. What kinds of urban design criteria, what kinds of trails, what kinds of pedestrian connections is the city going to be looking for? How is the city going to ensure or be satisfied that development is going to be compatible? There's a wide range of policies to support that. The plan also delineates environmental features and identifies supportive policies based on the environmental study. You'll find another schedule which indicates conceptual transportation elements, conceptual walkways, trail network, and so on, as well as policies to guide the road network. And there are some policies around servicing, again, cultural heritage, as well as how the plan is going to be implemented. So that's kind of a brief overview of what the policies say and what they're trying to achieve. So on this slide, I wanted to share and just kind of speak briefly to the land use plan that's being proposed. So you'll find this at the back of the document. This is Schedule B, the land use designations. I think the first thing you'll probably notice is how much green there is. Green represents the environmental system. That is the land use designation that recognizes environmental features to be protected, buffers around those features, and it also includes floodplain areas, so areas that are just not suitable for development. The next item that you'll see in the map is the low-density residential designation, and that's the yellowish beige kind of color. The low-density residential designation, as you can see, applies to the majority of potentially developable land. That designation permits a range of different unit types, singles, semis, and townhouses principally. It also reflects at the southwest corner of Schnarr Street and Erbsville Road, it reflects the existing community facility that's located there. So it's a pretty permissive designation, allowing for a range of appropriate uses, and the designation also includes a wide range of different criteria. So there's extensive policies around the design of those units, ensuring compatibility of those units with adjacent low-rise residential uses, and so on, creating trails, creating parks and open space. And then there is the low-density residential specific provision area number 1, located just across from Forest Gate Crescent. That designation is pretty much the same as the low-density residential designation, except that it adds apartment buildings up to 4 stories as a permitted use. So I think that's kind of how I characterize the land use map. There's also some other conceptual elements on the map. There are conceptual park spaces, conceptual stormwater management facilities. The intent of those things is to be conceptual in nature and to be confirmed through the development application process. So that's my brief, concise summary of a pretty lengthy, detailed document. In terms of the next steps in the process, we're looking for people's comments on this document, As I said, it's a draft document. We're open to making refinements and revisions. The intent is to do that over the next couple of months and to bring this forward again for council adoption by the spring of this year. And there will be another opportunity for public input at a formal public meeting. We'd certainly encourage people to visit the website. You can download the background report and all the work that went into that, the draft block plan, as well as the display boards that were presented at the public open houses. So with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, Rick. Does any council have any questions for staff? Please remember this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. And if there aren't any, I might have one. Councillor Vassic.
Of staff or of Rick? Both. Or, okay, I guess you're technically staff because the city has hired you. Okay, through you, Mayor. I'm just curious. It sounds like public consultation is, there's a heavy involvement with public consultation. So curious about how feedback from public has informed any changes to date.
Absolutely, through Mr. Mayor to the councillor. So I think actually the public's input has had a pretty big bearing on the way that we've made recommendations in this process. In particular, when we went out to the first public meeting, we heard a lot about traffic impact, traffic safety. We talked a lot about Conservation Drive and Erbsville Road and the intersection there. A lot of people expressed a lot of interest in seeing direct pedestrian connections. And one of the elements of the plan that we proposed is to show sidewalks on both sides of Erbsville Road with the intent that that will be implemented as development proceeds. So I would say we've been very responsive to the need and the desire of the public to see pedestrian connections and safety absolutely ensured. The other thing that we've heard from people is a very strong emphasis on making sure that this plan does everything possible to protect the environment. I think that's been a very key principle of the public, and we've absolutely carried forward the environmental study that was completed in June 2018, and in fact we've included very detailed policies in that regard. So I think those are a couple of examples of where we've been very responsive to the input that we've received. But there's certainly been a very wide range of input and different comments as well. Okay.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I was trying to understand how you established the buffer zones, in particularly north of Wideman Creek. So north of Forest Gate Crescent and north of Wideman Creek, because I also see that you've listed on your active transportation Schedule D in the report. And I think this is a bit tricky, by the way, because normally when we receive a report like this, we do have copies of all the plans to look at on the overhead, as opposed to this, which doesn't show all of the elements of the plan. So it's a bit tricky because now I'm looking at Schedule D in the draft report that nobody gets to see. So maybe for the next public meeting, we can have all of the scheduled plans. But, you know, basically right on that red dotted line north of Wideman Creek, you're also showing a proposed conceptual trail location. And yet it's also listed as being within the low density residential developable area. And that doesn't make sense to me. It would make sense to me that there'd be more of a buffer in which the trail is set, but maybe you can help me understand why they're one in the same location.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. With respect to the first comment about seeing the fulsome set of maps as part of the presentation in the future, can certainly take that away, and we'll be sure that that's the case. Just for the public's reference, they can download the entire plan at the website, just so people are aware of that. With respect to showing a trail on the east side of Erbsville Road, I think you're talking about just north of Forest Gate Crescent. So in terms of the environmental features in that area, you know, we've carried forward the recommendations of the previous environmental study. And for some reason, they're not showing a buffer from the creek in that area. I think the one thing I would note is that any development application that comes forward is going to be subject to a site-specific environmental impact study. So there is opportunity in the future for the city to refine the environmental features, including the buffers. And I would expect, given the recommendations of the environmental study, which do speak to the idea of a 30-meter buffer around the creek, I would expect that the city would be looking for an increase in the buffers in that area. With respect to the trail in that area, I think the intent of Schedule D was to show the trails in a conceptual way. So the actual location of the trail, I think, would need to be located at the edge of a buffer, certainly within the developable area typically, and it would be subject to the EIS. So I think that there's further opportunity to confirm the actual location of that through the development application process.
In general, I'm not sure why we would wait for a site-specific EIA when it appears when typically we have a planning process that speaks to a 30-meter buffer. So I'm just going to leave that with you. My other questions were with regard to orientation of the conceptual trail locations, because typically as this is going to form a portion of our active transportation corridor within the west side of the city. And I think we should be thoughtful in terms of creating opportunities for people to get from one place to another off-road. And so it's curious to me that we wouldn't have a conceptual trail location basically across the north of the properties on Schnarr Street, where you show that buffer, the environmental system. It would make sense if we're going to have an environmental system running behind the developable areas on the east side of Erbsville Road, that we would also consider that for the north side of Schnarr Street, and then connecting directly into that trail that is either trail or stormwater easement or whatever that is on Regal Place. And then the other piece is like, there is the other street that resides in the north, not part of the study area, but there is some sort of easement there too. And I don't know whether or not that's a critical link as well to move people from that place into this new block plan and out to Erbsville Road. I realize it means a creek crossing, but I'm just trying to be thoughtful in terms of if we have no trail on that north side, it reduces the ability there. So can you look to see whether there's a possibility for a trail on the north of Schnarr Street in that green space?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly discuss that with city staff and take that one away. I think it would be a bit challenging, given that it is under private ownership, and it's not likely to result in comprehensive redevelopment. Our expectation on the north side of Schnarr Street is rather that the existing owners may want to continue to use their single attached dwellings, potentially rebuild their dwelling, but we don't really anticipate seeing comprehensive redevelopment. So the acquisition of a trail in that area would be quite challenging, and the city would have to acquire that land.
But if this is just a plan, wouldn't we normally capture something like that within a plan? I mean, we certainly do in our OP.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can, like I said, we can certainly take it away, but even in the long term, we see limited opportunity for that to be implemented.
And then my other question is with regard to the conceptual trail locations and connections on Erbsville Road. It's curious to me that you wouldn't have these conceptual locations actually located across the street from one another. They're offset, which again, like, it probably has to do with a 30-meter buffer off of the creek, but it makes no sense that you've got a buffer on one side and not on the other.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as I mentioned, the buffers were carried over from the environmental study. We can certainly look and revisit the data and see if there's anything that we missed there. I think we can take those comments away and consider some refinements.
Councillor Bodley, then Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I think you synthesized what I heard from residents at the public information sessions and outside of those public information sessions. Probably the two emerging themes that I heard most frequently were around the environmental piece and around sort of the pedestrian realm through sort of the subdivision. So I have a few questions around that, and then additional one, and some of this might be rehashing, so I apologize, but just for those who may not have heard or been at the public information sessions, can you speak to sort of future plans around Conservation Drive and Erbsville Road for improving traffic flow through there? I know it's considered by many to be one of the more dangerous intersections, particularly given the barn that is located at the corner of Conservation and Erbsville on private property. And so if you could maybe speak to some of the challenges, given that it's a cross-section of a regional and city road, but also some of the opportunities in the future to improve access, vehicular access through that area.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Absolutely agree. I think this was probably the number one issue that we heard the most about from residents was the challenge and the danger and the safety associated in driving in that area. So as part of that, although that intersection isn't precisely in our study area, we nonetheless took the comment away and we studied it as part of our traffic impact study. And you can find the results of that analysis in our background report. The results of our analysis suggested that it appears that a four-way stop at Erbsville Road and Conservation Drive is warranted and would result in some pretty significant improvements to traffic flow, as well as to address the safety concerns that we've heard. So that was a recommendation we've made. I actually don't think it was a new recommendation. I think it was just building on and emphasizing the recommendation that's been made before. In terms of when and how that gets implemented, I think that would really be up to the region, just given that it is, Erbsville at least, is a regional road. So, and perhaps city staff have a better sense of the timing of implementation of that.
Nothing to you, Mr. Mayor. The region doesn't have any imminent plans for upgrades. We've been in consultation with our regional staff as well to highlight that there is development coming both from this area and adjacent in Beaver Creek Meadows. So I think they are looking at different options, potentially in the interim four-way stop. The timing which nothing's been confirmed, but I think as plans become more refined, I think that will help the region make an informed decision in the future.
Thank you. And just for further context, I think there's going to be an opportunity when the city does reconstruction on Conservation Drive to engage in more discussions with the region on what the appropriate solution is for that intersection. And I would also state that just a quick thank you to regional staff who perhaps maybe even an unprecedented decision to implement traffic calming on Erbsville Road this summer, which had a significant impact on reducing the challenges with vehicular traffic turning left onto Erbsville Road from Conservation Drive. It was I know, having traveled that area, I thought that it was again unprecedented almost on a regional road to implement traffic calming like that, and it had a big impact. I know I slowed down quite a bit driving through that area. When just in perhaps this is a question for Mr. Rapp, actually, given that we're going through our budget process at this point in time, and this kind of ties into some of the conversation that Councillor Freeman was bringing forward around trails in the area. We have a capital budget item 583 in Integrated Planning and Public Works for our trails in the new development areas in Northwest Waterloo. It's about $250,000 annually for the next 10 years to improve the trail system through this area. And I'm curious about how that aligns with these block plans as they come forward to make sure that, to Councillor Freeman's point, that these trails are, in fact, going somewhere that people want to get to.
Certainly through Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Bodley. What we would initially rely on is the West Side Trail Master Plan. Take a look at that. It was probably done in the early to mid 1990s. So we would augment that trail plan with this block plan and identify where the linkages are. And then through the implementing draft plans of subdivision, we would further fine tune those linkages. And then we would try and align what a developer commitment is, depending on if it runs through the draft plan of subdivision, and then our commitment if it's running through municipal land holdings or open space lands. That's the process we would utilize. And as far as the exact how much funding we would have to pull that off, we would work with Environment and Park Services and try and prioritize collectively what should be done first. And again, that would also be tied to the draft plan approval and the registration of the actual lands before we would have access to them. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. More to come, I guess, is the short of that answer in terms of how we connect everything. I think it's important, though, as we're going through these block plans, that when we're conceptualizing where these trails go, that they don't end somewhere where there's nowhere else for them to go, particularly given the environmentally sensitive context to this, to the whole surrounding area. So then speaking further to that, and piggybacking a little bit off of Councillor Freeman's commentary around the 30-meter buffer, I in further conversations that we've had offline, I recognize that there's an existing zoning permission for MD3 right at the corner of this block plan that is part of the justification or issue that we're dealing with requiring a 30-meter wildlife buffer there. But and also I note that the little swath of land on either side of the creek there between Forest Gate and the hatched red line there is city-owned property, which is already offering sort of a natural 15-meter buffer. Personally, I would like to see as this plan comes forward that there's at least a reference to that buffer, even though it is on city-owned property, that 15-meter buffer. And I would like to see some commentary that addresses the potential for an additional 15-meter buffer to be commensurate with what's on the other side of the road, understanding that there's existing permissions for zoning in that area. So I would leave that with you to consider. My other question is around, currently we have a temporary environmental easement, which, based on conversations I've had with legal staff, is a peculiar sort of arrangement that we have. But we have a temporary easement along the back of Regal Place, which, to my knowledge, it was intended as a wildlife buffer for understanding the existing conditions of the sort of subdivision. And I'm curious what, from your perspective, will happen to that easement once development starts going through here. Are we considering that creek buffer to be this new version of the easement, thus eliminating the need for that temporary easement off Regal Place, or is this in addition to it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think you hit the nail on the head there with that response, is that that easement that is intended to facilitate wildlife movement, I think was always intended as a temporary measure until such time as the city could secure the buffer around Weidman Creek. The intent is that in the long term, Weidman Creek would function as the wildlife buffer. And there is also the opportunity in the future to design the culvert under Erbsville Road in such a manner to facilitate that wildlife movement as well. As to the future of that conservation easement, I think that may be a bit of a legal question as to whether it should be lifted or not. I do know from the environmental study, the recommendation was that, even though the wildlife function of that easement's not really needed, I think the intent of the easement is to facilitate plant growth and for trees to be there. And I think that still is relevant in terms of creating wildlife movement, as well as creating a buffer between the uses on Regal Place and backing onto the future development to the south. So if the easement is lifted, if that's determined to be appropriate, I still think that residents should be encouraged to retain the vegetation in that area.
Appreciate that commentary, and I think it speaks to even more the necessity for this to be a 30-meter buffer going from one side to the other long term, and how we end up securing that. I'll leave to how you want to word that in the final version of the block plan. Another couple of questions that I had were from residents sort of surrounding the general context of the area, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond to it in terms of your thought process around whether maps of this area should be including broader environmentally sensitive contexts, for example, the ESL, the ESPA to the southwest, the Laurel Creek Conservation Area. So just to give a broader context to how unique this area is from an environmental protection perspective. And I'll loop that in with the secondary question around your comments with respect to the floodplain, and if you could elaborate on that, speaking to some of the challenges that are associated with building in the floodplain, whether or not specific references to the floodplain need to be verbalized in the block plan, so that we are again identifying some of the context of this unique area within the city.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm certainly happy to take both of those comments away and give them some further thought. As I think about it, there may be some value in providing a bit more of a context map, because I do think the policies make reference to some of the broader environmental features and systems in the area. So I think even to enlighten the reader as to the context, I think it could be valuable in that regard. Of course, in the context of this study, we wouldn't necessarily want to apply policy broadly to that area, but I think having a map giving the context certainly wouldn't hurt, so we can take that one away. With respect to floodplains, certainly I'm open and happy to take the point away as to whether we need to kind of elaborate on the policies and the references to floodplains. I think from my perspective, we've included the floodplains within the environmental system. So there's a pretty clear and strong policy direction that development is not permitted in the floodplain.
Perfect, thank you. And if I can be permitted one last question, Mayor Jaworski.
No, it's too late. Sorry about that.
I don't take orders very well, so I'm going to ask it anyways. I'm just speaking to the specific provision area, number 1, the area where stacked towns would theoretically be permitted. I'd like you to maybe speak to some of the challenges with respect to the density targets that we are asked to meet under provincial policy. And I know there's a reference in here in the plan around 55 residents and jobs per hectare, and how that would be 618 people if you lay it out over the total developable area in the plan. And I'd like you to maybe speak to how we got to this specific provision area specifically, and maybe if you could speak to, particularly at the second public information session, I will recall that there was a proposal where that would be a 6-story apartment building, and how we got from a 6-story apartment building down to 4-story stacked townhouses, and how that aligns with our growth targets.
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair. So certainly the region has provided a pretty clear expectation that the city needs to be facilitating more compact development, providing for a wide range of unit types. And amongst what the region calls the greenfield areas of the region, there's a minimum density target of 55 people and jobs per hectare. And looking at this area, we didn't see any particular reason why that couldn't be achieved. So we set that out as an overall target for this whole area to contribute to. And that's not to be applied on a development application by development application basis, but just represent an overall target. And I think just in the spirit of contributing to that regional target. Through this study, we had the opportunity to kind of drill down a little bit and figure out what kinds of uses are appropriate where in this community. And looking at it, what we felt is the majority of the area, it's kind of difficult to be too prescriptive. We don't want to say singles here, towns here, semis here. it's too prescriptive. When you go down that path, you kind of you'll likely face amendments to the block plan because the developer's not likely going to be consistent with a very detailed plan like that. So we took the approach of being pretty flexible for most of the study area in terms of allowing for singles, semis, and townhouses. Specific provision area 1, we felt, in our opinion, seemed appropriate for low-rise apartments and stacked townhouses. And the basis for 4 stories actually comes from the City of Waterloo's official plan. So currently this area is designated low-density residential, and it allows for apartments up to 4 stories. So what we've done is we've taken that permission and we've said, here's an appropriate site where we think that this could be located. So we've kind of drilled down a little bit about the specifics. We didn't want to permit 4-story apartment buildings widely across this area, but we felt that this one site had the potential. And I think one of the reasons for that is sort of the secluded nature of the site. It's surrounded by by environmental system uses. There's a lot of opportunity for buffering and separation from adjacent low-rise residential uses. So from our perspective, that site made a lot of sense for a 4-story apartment building. And you're absolutely right. When we went to the second public open house, we actually presented a 6-story apartment building as an option to be further considered. But upon further evaluation, and I think in the interest of aligning with the region or with the city's official plan and the notion of 4 stories maximum in the greenfield area, we decided to bump it down to 4 stories on that basis.
Thank you. I forgot I had actually one more question. Sorry, Mayor.
Okay, what? One more.
There's nothing else on the docket tonight, so I'm just gonna go on and on and on if that's okay. No.
You're doing a good job.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, with great thanks to Commissioner Dykstra. I'm wondering if you could speak to the Early Years Center, which is located within the block plan, and whether we have any sort of long-term vision for what that site is going to be, and short-term vision, I guess, at the same time.
Through the mayor to Councillor Bodley, currently the use for the early years center is ongoing, and we are in discussions with them to understand their plans and see if there is a fit with ours. Staff have looked at that in terms of how passive parks can be integrated in their stormwater management ponds as well. It'll be through this plan process that we end up with what we see as a suitable fit for the community.
And nothing within this plan process is antithetical to your short or long-term thinking for this site?
At this time, we're working with planning as they move through and have moved through. We're open ears on what can occur here.
Well, I don't know if there are any questions left, Councillor Bonagor, but go for it.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. You didn't leave me much, actually. My good colleague here has asked many of I only had a few questions and he's asked most of them. But there's one that I'm just curious about in general. Just given that climate change is predicted to bring more extreme weather events, I'm seeing in this plan, like there's lots of water, there's lots of, there are some proposed stormwater sites, but can you give me an idea of what is expected to be happening in this part of the city in the next, let's say, if we can even predict, like in the next 10 to 20 years, and will the proposed buffering and the like be enough?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I may have to take that question away and consider how the environmental study factored in climate change into their analysis. I would think that given how recent the study is and given that provincial policy currently does speak to climate change, I would imagine that they have given that consideration and that it's factored into their delineation of floodplains and their establishment of buffers. But if you don't mind, I'll take that one away and I'll ponder it a bit more.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor as well, I'm glad you raised that because I think I omitted a point that I wanted to make in the presentation, is that the block plan doesn't stand on its own. It's intended to build on all the other policies and the guidelines that the city offers. So if the city has guidance around climate change, with respect to low impact development or whatever, that'll still be applicable here. We're trying to build on that with some specifics.
Okay, Councillor Vasek.
Thanks, through you, Mayor. Okay, so through the conversation, and is making me think that you're basing this proposed low-density residential specific provision area number 1 on the official plan that was approved in 2012. So there's an official plan review proposed in the budget for 2021. And so I'm thinking along the lines of affordable housing. So you originally, or more affordable housing across the city. So as this emerges as an increasingly challenging issue that the community needs to deal with, to have a wider supply of housing at a range of prices, I'm just curious if, in light of the official plan review coming up, is it wise in terms of community need to base what's proposed in this block study on and what appears to be an outdated official, or maybe needing a refresh official plan? Or is it good to think about what would we be thinking about in the official plan for 2021 should it be approved in the budget? And would that say, no, actually that apartment building probably is important there? And not to say, I definitely don't want to dismiss public input. That is also important, but we're also balancing that with a pretty intense community need for a diverser supply of housing. So just curious, if you're thinking about the official plan refresh, would you say that this would be an area that could use a wider range of housing that you've kind of scaled back from?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. It's a really interesting question that you raise. I think my response to it, without dismissing, but I'll start with that and then I'll go from there. I think my response to that is we're planning within the official plan's current planning horizon, which is to the year 2031. So I think that when we are providing for a plan that contributes to the density target to 2031, I think we are planning in a responsible way that's going to allow for development to accommodate anticipated growth. So I think that's kind of the basis of using the official plan. Like, notwithstanding the fact that certainly the new official plan might come out, it may have an increased expectation on density, but I think that given that the intent is for this area to be developed by 2031 within that horizon, I think it does make a lot of sense for us to use that 55 people and jobs per hectare density as a basis. I'd also kind of say, though, that the 55 people and jobs per hectare is a minimum density target. And I think the plan does a good job of supporting a wide range of unit types in a way that's pretty appropriate for this area. Certainly singles, semis may be constructed, but I would actually expect a fair bit of townhouses in this area as well, and certainly the landowner has expressed some interest in that. So I'd kind of leave it at that. Does that answer your question?
It answers my question, but it doesn't ease my concern.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to think about if there's a way to ask a question that would result in the exploration of an increased density with a different, because I guess I'm not just thinking about density. I'm also thinking about the type of housing, right? Which, I mean, I guess if you have apartments, then you have increased density. So I see how they're connected. But I'm just curious if you were to push a little further on that, if you were to say that you were to look at a little bit more increased density, what would that look like, and what would the range of housing options open? What would that open up?
Through Mayor Jaworski to the councillor, that's definitely some aspects that we need to take into consideration, looking at the variety. But I will note, we also have to look at other factors such as the context for the area. So we're trying to find a balance of appropriate density given the surrounding community, given the surrounding uses, and some of the infrastructure that is there. So where it's located in the context of Waterloo, we need to balance those factors as well. And given the density as well, given the density of the environmental features in this area, there's only so much that the area can support. So we're trying to walk a fine line. We're looking at that, but we'll definitely take those considerations further and to see where we can at least look at opportunities to encourage and to promote a wide variety of housing moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
May I add on to that, Mr. Mayor? Just thinking about your question directly too is, where could we introduce more density? And I think that the opportunities are pretty limited. When I think about the lands on the south side of Regal Place, I wouldn't want to increase the proposed density there just because, we're providing for up to townhouses and we want to ensure compatibility with the Regal Place units. And I think the same kind of goes for the east side of Urbsville, as well as on Schnarr Street, where we want to, provide for compatibility with Regal Place, given that those units would be potentially directly abutting the Regal Place units, and also kind of recognizing the historic character of Schnarr Street that we want to kind of build on. When I kind of break it down, I think the site that we've identified as Site-Specific Provision Area 1 provides really the best opportunity for that kind of apartment building to contribute to the mix of unit types. So I think we can certainly take it away and ponder some improvements, but I think the plan does a good job of facilitating a mix of unit types, including some interesting innovative units like lane-based townhouses. The plan also, of course, builds on the official plan, and it permits second suite units, basement apartments, in conjunction with other units. So we'll take the comment away, but I think we've done a pretty good job of facilitating a pretty wide range of unit types given the context.
And thank you very much. I will now ask any registered delegations to come forward, of which we have one. And it is Heather Bartlett, resident of Waterloo. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I wanted to speak behalf today on some members of Forest Gate Crescent concerned with specific provision 1 specifically, just its proximity directly to the entrance and exit to the street, as well as any impact on any potential traffic that it would add to the area. So I do want to present a petition to council today to ensure that the specific provision 1 remains consistent with the low density residential in the area. Thank you. That's it.
That you're just presenting the petition.
Yeah, so
Is there anything that you want to speak to about that? I think
a lot of it was covered. I unfortunately moved to the area about 6 months ago, so I wasn't able to or aware of the public meetings that have taken place leading up to today. But a lot of the comments were already discussed just recently by other members of council and city planning, specifically relating to the desire to remain compatible with the residences on Forest Gate as well as on Regal Place, to which these units would back directly onto and across from.
And you've had the opportunity to provide input to Mr. Martins?
We have exchanged an email, but it was very brief. So if we could elaborate on that further, that would be great.
That would be good. Any questions of this delegate? Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, can you just help me to understand what your expectations are on low density residential? What does that look like in your mind's eye?
So more so allowing it to be consistent with the low density residential areas that you would see outlined in the yellow, as opposed to including the provision at all, I guess.
I just want to make sure I understand. So the Forest Gate Crescent is zoned residential 4, and it looks like there's single residential dwellings.
Correct.
And similarly, Regal Place is zoned, it looks like R3, and there's single residential. So we're talking about that little hole, right? The little gray area, whatever.
Yeah.
So it would be your expectation that it would be compatible if they were townhouses, or it would only be compatible if they were single residential?
Ideally single residential. Okay. Mm-hmm. That was feedback that various members have expressed.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
And sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Can you elaborate for me about really what that specific provision area, what is actually feasible in terms of the number of units if it was to be a 4-story stacked townhouse or a 4-story apartment building, what is actually feasible in terms of the number of units?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we haven't done a specific assessment of exactly how many units could be accommodated, but I would estimate probably in the order of 20 to 30 units, something like that. It's a pretty constrained site.
And if you were to, if we were to look at that as a low density residential yellow area, similar to the other areas noted on the map, how many homes, if you had to guess, would be permitted in that area if it was to be downzoned, so to speak?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, kind of hard to say, but considerably less. I mean, potentially 10. I think I would note that the specific provision area does permit singles. It does permit semis, townhouses, and apartments. One of the reasons why we felt that apartments would be appropriate is because of the nature of the constraints around the site. It makes it actually really difficult to bring in a road and build single detached residential units in sort of a feasible way that optimizes the use of the land. That was one of the considerations.
Right. And so just to quick math there, we're talking about the difference being roughly 20 units.
Very roughly. We can take that away and perhaps do a bit more analysis on that.
Sure, that would be great. But I think it's important to contextualize the exact, notwithstanding the fact that somebody could purchase that piece of property and build to the yellow low density area based on what their desire is. I think it's important to contextualize that the maximum, what the maximum difference is between the density, what it could be. And I suspect you're probably right that it's in the 20 unit area.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, just to add on to that, is one of the constraints I think would be the provision of parking. When you're talking about a development of that size, it's very difficult to provide parking in the form of a structured parking garage. It just wouldn't be feasible to do that. So you're kind of limited to surface parking, which I think is one of the reasons why development would be quite constrained there.
Agreed. And then just lastly, sorry, I'm monopolizing this conversation. Sorry, Mayor Jaworski. But if we were to try to get to the 55 people and jobs per hectare target that the region has laid out for us without this specific provision area, or with downgrading that specific provision area, we wouldn't be hitting it, is that fair to say, without then looking at another piece of that property and redesignating that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know about that. I think we probably could still achieve the density just through the provision of townhouses. But I think one of the risks, though, is that the low-density residential designation permits a broad range of unit types. So it could allow the developer to come forward with just singles. And if that's the case, then you do kind of come at risk of not achieving that stated density target.
Councillor Freeman.
Sorry, still on that same page. It is curious to me that you would be recommending an increased density there, recognizing that all around it is R4, R5, and R3, and R4 and R5 do allow semi-detached, but not a 4-story stacked townhouse situation. And I guess I don't think there's any major or minor node or corridor until you get back to Laurelwood and Herbsville Road. So I guess for me, when this report comes back, it's going to be helpful to understand the planning rationale around increased density outside of what we would speak to in our OPA around nodes and corridors, and the need for increased density in alignment with those plans. Because there's other parts of the cities where we don't have a major or minor node or corridor, and we've effectively said no to stacked towns in particular, because of access to things like higher order transit and tools that help move people from those higher density locations to amenities. So I think I'm going to need to see a lot more rationale in this report why we need the density there, as opposed to other places in the city where we have very distinctly said no.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may respond very briefly to that. Certainly happy to take that away and we can elaborate on our rationale behind the thinking there. I think it's important for me to point out, though, that we're not proposing increased density. That actually the official plan currently in the low-rise residential designation permits up to 4 stories. What we're doing in this proposed block plan is narrowing down where those 4 stories are actually permitted. So the net result is actually reduced density in the overall block plan area.
My understanding is we made some amendments to our OP, some general amendments to our OP, and during our comprehensive bylaw review, we were very purposeful in terms of elaborating on that language to say that we agree that while the OP says that, it would be in conjunction with planning rationale to suggest that it's needed there. Because otherwise, every piece of single residential land that we've got in this city, if somebody bulked up land, they could put a 4-story stacked town, and I think we can all agree that that's not where we're headed. So I would very much like to see some very significant planning rationale to help me to understand why this is the right location. I really hate it when we pull out just one sentence out of our OP because it works with what we're thinking about at the time.
Okay, if there's no more registered delegations, is there anyone else present here tonight to wish to speak to this application? As a reminder, if you just wish to receive further notice of this application, please sign the registry located on the desk at the rear of council chambers. See one taker. Are there any others? Please stand up behind them, please. Come on up, and you'll have 5 minutes, and please state your name and municipality of residence for us, please.
Hi, Samuel Kiswani from Forest Gate Crescent, and thank you all for your time today and for the consideration. I would like just to add one more point to the special area 1. If you look at that area plan and looking at Forest Gate, as the respected council member stated, it is really a 4-story building there will really look out of place in that area. One thing that wasn't mentioned is that one of the principles I looked up, in addition to the context and similarity to the nearby buildings, the principle says that there should be provided enough sufficient room for growth of mature trees. The interesting thing is that that lot specifically has at least, I guess, 4 really mature trees, and I don't see how you can build a 4-story building while giving those trees any room to grow anymore. Like, it is like a single house with really huge trees around it. So I like to keep that also in consideration, that that lot is not really a good fit for a condominium style 4-story building, for the compatibility with the surrounding building and also for the environmental effect that it will have on the trees around there. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Next up.
Hi.
And just to confirm, are you here to speak, or you just happen to be relax? Okay, thank you. So 2 more speakers, that's it.
Hi, my name is Daru Malhotra. I'm also from Forest Gate Crescent. And I just have a couple of points that I wanted to mention. First, while making a plan, maybe you could consider transportation if we have access, because we would need to have, as we increase the population, then we would need more transportation. Like the bus connectivity hardly starts from Shoppers, and there is no way to connect through local transit from our place or even beyond. And secondly, there are no parks around. So when we are thinking of making a plan for residents, and please, could you also include parks around it so we don't have to walk so far, or maybe have parks at each backyard. So thirdly, the YMCA, we limited the time till 12 o'clock for YMCA, and I know that's because of some funding, I guess, but I was thinking that property is there, and maybe if we could look at some other ways, probably a preschool or some other functions that it could add and use that property instead of just using it till 12 and not doing anything after that. So.
Great, thank you for your input, and don't forget to sign the registry at the back if you haven't already.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last, please. Thank you. And again, name and municipality.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, how are you? Matthew Colleton, resident of 643 Regal Place. My wife and I and our kids newly moved to town last year, so it's kind of all new to us. We were told that the property behind us when we sold the house was conservation and would never be developed. Kind of looks like that's the case, kind of not. One of our big concerns is lack of green space. We moved from Burlington where there's a park on every other corner. Now we have to get in a car and drive our 6 and our 4-year-olds to a park. And just the overall maintenance of Regal Place. I don't know who's responsible for that right now, but we have a bike path right beside our street connecting to Schnarr. And all year the weeds were 6 feet high. And there were snakes and frogs, and it really wasn't safe for our kids to walk through it. And it was supposed to be an access point. So I'm pretty sure that we probably pay some of the highest taxes in the region, and we just have no access to tennis courts or parks for our kids to play. And I was just hoping we could include some of that in the plan.
Thank you. And on that maintenance issue, I'm not sure if it's ours, but if you can somehow get in touch with our staff, we'll make sure that we get you a response on that.
Just to follow up on that, Mr. Mayor, I called 3 times this year and was assured it would be taken care of. And it grew to 6 feet, and it's back down to maybe 3 feet now. But nobody ever came and followed up on it. I got the whole head nod treatment from City of Waterloo. Nobody ever came out to me.
Well, we'll find out. Somebody have a business card over there? We'll get in touch. Make sure you leave your email address, or maybe put an asterisk beside it, and
Thank you very
make
much.
sure we get it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Yeah. I just have a question just from those 3 delegations. Just one last question for staff. While we've been talking, I've also been kind of looking at the Google Street View to have a look at what's surrounding areas. And it looks to me that the nearby houses are 2 stories plus a roof. So when we're looking at that special area where it's 4 stories, like how different would it really be in relation to the housing stock that's nearby?
Through Mr. Mayor, well, I think it would be at least an additional story and a half, something of that nature. And I should clarify my point earlier. In terms of the rationale behind the 4-story building, it's really not just what the official plan says about low-density residential and what it permits. I think that was sort of a starting point of our rationale. But really, the main aspect of our rationale is we believe that site can be designed in a way that's compatible with adjacent uses. So, I mean, in addition to just being, as you said, perhaps 1 story greater, there's also a lot of separation distance because the site is surrounded by green space, and it's also bordered on the east side by Erbsville Road. So there's a lot of opportunity to site the building in a way that's compatible, doesn't create privacy issues, doesn't create shadow issues, and so on. We're quite satisfied that it would be compatible. That's part of the rationale. I thought I would just clarify that.
Great, thank you. That's appreciated. Thank you.
If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Rick, for that. On our council agenda, next up on our council agenda, I think, is questions, which I think you had a question. I thought so. It was something to do with the budget and final budget questions. It was Councilor Reid. Was it you? Oh, maybe it was Councilor Reid. Okay. Just queuing you up as the people are. No? Okay. New business, you're up after that. Oh. Could everybody please maybe move out to the hallway? Oh, they're signing the Okay, question from Councillor Reith. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. I was it's just a budget thing that I would like staff to consider when we're talking about the budget next week and the week after. The physician recruitment line, if we could take that out of our contingency, our council contingency, and move that over to economic development. It seems to make sense to me, and I know that the chamber, that's where physician recruitment comes out of, and that would free up our 20 grand out of our contingency that we could maybe use for something else, and we could let our very capable economic development committee use that or support that project if they see fit. So just a
Is
heads
that a
up.
question the CAO can take note of?
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Veith. We can take that one away for sure. And just to recap, I think what you're saying is instead of funding from capital budget contingency reserve, that we refer it through the Economic Development Committee and the associated funding from that committee if they deem it worthy moving forward. Is that fair? Okay, so we'll take that away and be able to respond more appropriately on budget day. Yep.
Under new business, Councillor Vasek.
Yes, well, this was the weekend of Waterloo, and me and my family made it on, I know many of you were there, and my family and I made it on Sunday morning, and it was wonderful. So a huge thank you to staff and volunteers who put it on. We encountered many excellent volunteers, in particular the volunteer who was at the amazing slide, very engaging, very outgoing, very friendly. And I mean, there were snow sculptures. That slide was a lot of fun. The ice sculptures were also so impressive. And then I ran into the mayor while we were testing out fancy bikes from King Street Cycles. And I'm saving up now for an e-bike because you feel like you're still exercising because your legs are moving, but the bike is doing all the work. So, so that's my new goal. So excellent. And I think they made it into a loop. Which was different from last year where there were lots of different sites. And I think it was the perfect amount of time for a family with a 5-year-old who, like, it was too much last year to go around all the places. This was like the perfect amount and the perfect amount of stuff. And the weather didn't exactly cooperate, but there were still lots of people out there. And I was talking to arts and culture staff and saying, you know, this seems like it's really turning into an institution. And they said I think it already is an institution. People really know Waterloo now. So, great event.
And the dogs were still there, Councillor Veith. The dogs, yes, the ice dogs. Councillor Bonnegar, Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I just wanted to give a shout out and congratulate the winners of the first annual Arab Women of Waterloo Region Awards. The awards were held last night. I was lucky enough to attend along with the mayor and a good number of other people who were there. And it was just a fantastic, well-run evening celebrating the contributions of largely immigrant women to our community. And as an immigrant woman, I thought it was a beautiful coming together of community. And I just wanted to congratulate again the women who were selected as this year's winners. And I look forward to next year.
Well, hopefully someday there'll be an Australian Women of Waterloo Region. It was Australia Day. Oh, happy Australia Day. Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, in that same vein, Councillor Vasek and I were both at the Leadership Waterloo Region Gala, which I think conflicted with the other gala. And we have 2 members of staff that are part of the class of 2020. So Aaron Meany, and firefighter, and Louise Finley, our active transportation coordinator, and another member of the Waterloo community, Teresa Norris-Liu, received recognition for all of her volunteer achievements and volunteer commitments through Rotary as a Paul Harris Fellow. So it was a special night for a lot of people in our community. And I will say that I really do appreciate the fact that the City of Waterloo continues to be a strong supporter of that program and uses it as a capacity building tool for our staff. So I think that's really great.
Excellent, especially as it continues to grow and evolve with Leadership Waterloo Region itself. So excellent. Seeing no further new business, we have some bylaws to enact. Councillor Henry, Councillor Bodley, any questions, Councillor Bodley?
I have 11 questions. Would you like them alphabetically or?
Chronologically. All those in favor? All of us, thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Vasek, we're adjourned.